Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui, coming to you from the World Forum for Asia in Hainan Island. Many would agree that the most significant economic story of the past 3 decades has been the rise of China, and a close second has been the story of India. Today, the big question remains how fast the latter can grow, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi has certainly made a very good start. So what's next for India's economy? Where does India fit into Pan-Asian connectivity? And what will top Modi's agenda when he visits Beijing in May? Today, I'm very happy to be joined by Dr. Didar Singh, Secretary General of the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. But before we start the interview, let's look at this.
In this room, India's top corporates are evaluating Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's pet project, Make in India, a plan by which Modi plans to make India a manufacturing hub. Business leaders in India are positive, but they also know they will have to be patient to see results.
The new government that came in last year has certainly instilled a lot of confidence, both in foreign investors and Indian companies in terms of doing business in India. I see, our customers, particularly in the real estate, infrastructure segment, a lot more upbeat about making investments.
Chinese companies are also taking advantage of India's growing infrastructure sector. Chinese company Shanghai Urban Construction Group, or SUCG Infrastructure, is working in the Indian market through a joint venture with major Indian infrastructure group Larsen & Toubro Limited, also known as L&T. The company has been part of 3 Indian metro and rail projects. China and India are the 2 fastest growing economies in the world, but experts say until now, the bilateral business relations have been far from reaching their potential. There has been an aggressive push in the last few months to increase bilateral trade, with many Chinese companies announcing plans to expand to India as a part of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Make in India campaign, a push to lure foreign investors to the country in an effort to boost manufacturing. Some analysts believe the reality of the current global economy makes China and India natural partners.
India has now become indispensable to China for continuing Chinese economic growth. For a simple reason, markets in Europe are doing badly. United States is not in very good shape. The other markets are good, but they are really not got the potential of the Indian market. So today, China is indispensable to India. India is indispensable to China.
Bilateral trade between China and India stands at about $70 billion. With the recent effort by both countries to push investment and trade, experts believe it could be the key for the 2 nations to meet their true economic potential.
Welcome to Dialogue, sir.
Thank you.
IMF Chief Christine Lagarde says recently that India is poised to become the fastest growing major economy in the world and likely to overtake China this year. What do you think are the dynamics of your economic growth, and is overtaking China a priority on the agenda of Prime Minister Modi?
I don't think it's overtaking China is an issue or should be an issue, and I don't think it's a priority for Prime Minister Modi. But what is the priority for Prime Minister Modi is to ensure that we get good growth. And I think this is something which the compulsion comes from within India. It doesn't come from trying to be China or trying to be anybody else. We are a large country. We are a large market, but we also are a very poor country in the sense that we have a lot of poverty in the country. So unless we have enough growth, that means unless we reach 9-10% on a sustained basis for the next 10 to 15 years, we are not going to be able to solve the basic problem of development in our country. And I think that is the motivation that India and Prime Minister Modi have.
The word sustainability comes across as one of the most interesting words in the vocabulary of Chinese politicians. And in fact, many Chinese don't feel excited about surpassing the US economic total because we look at the per capita income. And secondly, we have achieved the rapid economic expansion at the cost of the environment. Look at the PM 2.5. And I was told that the hazardous fog in your country is a lot worse than in China. Do you think this is a price you have to pay? This is a necessary evil for whatever developing countries?
You see, it's a very difficult thing to maintain this balance. The whole concept of growth is changing. You're absolutely right. That can I have sustainable growth? First of all, I must have inclusive growth. That means I must get the bottom of rung of the ladder to also rise up and become equal partners in the growth story. That's the first challenge. The second challenge, which you're correctly pointing out, we have seen that the large-scale manufacturing that is required for this kind of growth ultimately leads to environment problems, as China is facing, as India is facing. So we must have, therefore, plans, strategies to ensure that the growth that comes in must be as clean as it is possible. Yes, it's very tough to say that, okay, everything should be clean. It costs more money to be clean. It requires a different type of technology. It requires a different kind of growth level that you're at. And this is something that I think both China and India have taken a common position with the West, that just because you polluted the planet, don't blame it on us today and stop our growth. But the fact is that we are responsible nations. And as responsible nations, while we grow, and we have this objective of higher growth for our populations, we also, as you're correctly pointing out, we have to look at per capita, we have to look at inclusive growth, we have to look at sharing the growth agenda and the development agenda across the whole population. These are difficult questions. It doesn't happen very, very easily. You have done pretty well in China, but with India it will take a little longer time.
To what extent has India's growth benefited from the international environment? For example, the decline in oil prices as well as recovery of both US and other major economies?
See, as is very clear, both with China and particularly with India, we are part of a global economy. And whatever moves in the global economy does impact India most directly, because exports, imports, everything is extremely important for the environment. Now you've mentioned two particular developments at the international level. One is the lowering of the price of petroleum products. Of course it helps India because we are major importers. We import 80% of our energy from overseas. So when the price falls, of course it helps us. It helps us not just in terms of balancing our budget, but it also brings inflation down so that our central bank can then look at reducing interest rates so that the cost of capital becomes easier for Indian business, for Indian industry, which is extremely important for us to make the investments in the country which are required. The second thing you talked about was the situation at a global level. I don't think there is much of a recovery in Europe. Certainly there is a recovery.
I'm not talking about recovery of the European Union, but rather the US, which is slowed down somehow. Is it a seasonal factor?
It is a seasonal factor, but I would say...
Or domestic politics?
It's, I think, global politics. It's global politics, it's global manufacturing situations. There is a shift which is taking place, no doubt about the fact that the growth area is going to be Asia. We all know that, and I think so does the West. The West also knows that. In that context, India's 600-700 million strong market is a very, very important factor in the growth story. It's an important factor not just for domestic India, but a factor for international investments into India. They look at that, and therefore you will see a fair amount of investment coming into India, and therefore the growth. So answer to your question is, yes, we are benefiting from the global environment.
Let's look at the trade deficit that you suffer from, the bilateral trade and economic relationship with the PRC. What can be done to balance the sheet?
Only one answer: investment, nothing else.
In the infrastructure?
Investment in any part of manufacturing, infrastructure, whatever. And I think in that sense, the very strong signal that President Xi gave when he came to India and announced $20 billion in 2 clusters in India was a very positive step, because what it showed was that you have the expertise, you have the extra surpluses which are available for investment, and if you bring them to India, you will not only help with opportunities, because the return on the investment that you get in India would be at this point higher than the return you get in most other places. So in that context, it's a good investment, and it helps the trade balance, which you correctly pointed out is skewed against India. The only way to handle it is more investment, and with that more investment, more products being made in India so that they can then be exported back to China.
We have 3 major policy banks like the National Development Bank, the Agriculture Bank, and the Export-Import Bank. Other than that, we are toying with the idea of using more of the AIIB, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. Do you think the investment of up to $20 billion will be done largely through the new multilateral financial institution like AIIB? What do you think of the implications of having India as one of the major founding members of this AIIB?
See, I look at it as both. In the sense that yes, India is a founding member of the AIIB, And India also, again, is with China, the founding member of the BRICS Bank, which is now referred to as the New
Development Bank.
The New Development Bank. Now, what is the signal here? The signal here is that developing countries must not be totally dependent on just Western financing institutions. We must have our own institutions to be able to push infrastructure. The signal here is that for emerging economies, for developing economies, infrastructure is the key to competitiveness. And unless you get your good infrastructure in place, you're never going to be able to compete at the global level. So India strongly supports both these moves. In terms of the 20 billion that you referred to, that President Xi said that possibly there could be this kind of investment in India, I don't believe that that is only limited to infrastructure. That is actually concentrated, or it was meant to be for two clusters which would develop, one in Maharashtra in one of our provinces and the other one in Gujarat, the other province.
The hometown of Prime Minister Modi. This is a big gift from President Xi Jinping to his friend.
Well, I don't think it's just a gift to his friend.
That'll be the envy of many of your neighboring countries.
No, but it's good economics, because Gujarat has shown that it's very business friendly, and Gujarat also has the Delhi-Mumbai corridor which is being developed across it. So these two clusters that are being talked about come as part of the Delhi-Mumbai industrial corridor. So there is a freight corridor which connects it, and these industrial areas will develop there. So I think it's a good place to invest, and I believe that the investment will be in manufacturing.
You know, Mr. Singh, the image of India is one of a strong mixture, and we have a strong mixed feeling about the image of India. On the one hand, you are, of course, the envy of those liberals who love democracy, free election, freedom of the speech, freedom of the media. On the other hand, the advantages could serve as the curse for the sustainable development. Let's look at the construction of infrastructure. I was told that some of the farmers in villages in your country refuse to be relocated because they demand expensive compensations, and they do that through the local city council, trade union, whatever, lobby groups, so that their rights could be protected. In China, we get it done very quickly. All right? So there's the contradiction between efficiency and social justice. How does the most populous democracy like India handle this thorny issue?
I must admit that the point that you're raising is a reality. I represent a business organization, and we have been making a lot of noise about the land bill and the availability of land for development. But I must just step back a little bit and mention that when we say India is the world's largest democracy, we also add to it that it's the world's noisiest democracy. We make a lot of noise. We have a lot of number of parties, we have a lot of number of stakeholders, and everybody has a say all the time. Now,
and therefore, can Prime Minister Modi deliver on his promise? Because he faces very strong opposition in the parliament.
This same noisy democracy gave, after 30 years, a single party, Mr. Modi's party, BJP, gave it a full majority in parliament. The same noisy democracy.
Well, that could be the honeymoon trip at the very beginning. The momentum of this honeymoon is likely to decline, as we witnessed in many other democracies, like the US. By the end of his second term, you know better about the approval rating of President Bush.
But let me just step back. I think in terms of this support that BJP got, in many ways, this was the voice of youth. This was a voice of youth expressing their desire and their aspirations for a better time and a better life. And in many ways, we also, as an organization, the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce, we said this clearly when Prime Minister Modi came in and the BJP came in. We said it's an agenda for implementation. Now, let's not talk, let's get it done. And I believe that it's not a question of who is or who is not there. The question is that the people want it. People want that development must happen. And land, yes, if it's an issue, okay, pay a higher price, but get it done. Because we have to ensure that manufacturing, employment, growth, jobs, all of it comes simultaneously, because if they don't, we're going to have a real problem on our hands.
I was told, if not warned, by some of my American friends that 1.5 years from now, in yet another presidential race, China would be likely to be singled out for China bashing campaign because of the growing uncertainty about China's rise in the Asia-Pacific region. However, Lee Kuan Yew, late founding father of Singapore, said over and over to many world leaders, most Chinese feel very comfortable with having a strong central government. And yet the central strong government which engineered the success of China's economic miracle was criticized in the West for the alleged human rights violations. And therefore, China, some of us feel confused as to why the mode of China's economic development always comes under fire from the West. Do you believe our Chinese road of development has its own merits and deserves fair respect?
Of course it does, of course it does, but I also believe that every country has the right to determine its own way of development. So China showed us a certain way. There's lots that we in India can learn, because we are also a developing country, we're also an emerging economy, and we must learn that you need discipline, you need a strong federal government, you need to make sure that your infrastructure comes into place. All these are very important lessons.
But don't you think we are, compared with India, we are a little bit too quiet? You are noisy, we are too quiet.
I think maybe it's in our genes. As Indians, we are too noisy. We talk a lot. And we make a lot of noise. But there is also a lot of diversity in India. And I think that diversity needs to be acknowledged in both a democratic format as well as a political format. So you have lots of parties, lots of people having their own views. But at the end of the day, I think everybody wants the development, and if we can have it the way China did with your almost miracle economic development, I hope that India will be able to follow down that road also.
Okay, thank you very much. I have to leave you there for the moment. You are watching Dialogue with Dr. Didar Singh, Secretary General of the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. We are talking about the sustainability of the Indian economy as opposed to our slowdown, which is described by the media as a new normal. We shall be back in a short while. Please stay with us. Welcome back, sir. Now, what are the deliverables of Prime Minister Modi when he comes over to China for a visit?
I think as we have seen with Prime Minister Modi, and as you know, it's the first time that he's serving in the central government. Prior to this, he was in the state government of Gujarat for 3 terms. I think the single most important thing that he is trying to establish is to raise the level of India's debate and India's engagement with major economies around the world. And I think he's also made a very strong bid that with our neighbors, we must have a very close engagement for common development, for common growth across it. So I think his main message and his main deliverable when he comes to China is actually going to be that we are your friends, we are Asian, we together have to grow together. Development is an agenda, just like it is for your people, it is for my people too. And we must collaborate to make sure that that happens.
Let me go back to one of the points you raised a few minutes earlier in the first half of the program. Investment would be viewed as a therapy for addressing the issue of a trade deficit between our two economies. But look at the risks that the Chinese investors could not afford to ignore. For example, the defeat of the Sri Lanka president in their campaign. And similarly, we have other cases in developing countries where you have free and fair elections. The mega projects of Chinese investment would be the victim of their domestic politics. Sri Lanka is one case, Myanmar, Tanzania in Africa, and perhaps one country in Latin America. How could we assess the political uncertainty? For example, India is very reluctant to join the New Silk Road Initiative, although you have become a founding member of AIIB, and you still harbor strong geopolitical suspicions against China. In that case, how can we root out the issue of mistrust so that our investment
Okay,
would not be barred, citing the reason of national security.
Okay,
Don't you think this is a form of trade protectionism?
No, not at all.
You don't
not
think
at
so?
all. First of all, I can't answer for Sri Lanka or any other country which may or may not have taken a certain view. For India, we know one thing for sure. No matter which government, and we have seen now so many types of government in the last 60 years, not once, there is not a single case of discrimination against any country or any company. There's not a single case. Why? Again, because of the fact that not only is government one of the players in our entire system, we have extremely strong judicial framework. We have extremely strong legal framework. And there's relief available for everybody to go out of the system of local politics. There's relief available at the central level, there's relief available in the courts, and in terms of foreign investment, we have seen a sustained policy over years now, ever since 91 when we opened our economy up for foreign investment. There has not been a single case of reversing backward on the foreign investment environment that we wish to project. And therefore I believe that whether it's Chinese investment or it's investment from Japan or investment from USA or whatever, it is as welcome and as well will be protected in many future environment.
Now, in most developing countries, corruption remains very serious. The other day we were talking about the relationship between government officials and investors and entrepreneurs. You came up with the idea of e-governance to promote the transparency. That may help solve the issue. Can you elaborate more as to whether India as a democracy would solve this problem more effectively than a country which is not viewed by the West as a democracy? When it comes to the issue of corruption.
When it comes to the issue of corruption, again, you heard me that day also, it's a common issue across all countries. It's not a question of being a democracy or not a democracy. Corruption emanates from human greed, maybe, it emanates from poverty, it emanates from so many different things. But the fact remains that the way to handle corruption is to ensure that A, you take a strong stand against it, irrespective of what kind of a government you are, because it is in the interest of you as a government to ensure that there is equality before law in terms of everybody. And I was making the second point that for private business it's very important to oppose corruption. You may benefit marginally from crony capitalism, but on a long-term basis you will pay the price. And I think private sector realizes this. We have seen in India that our private sector has been right up front saying that we need stronger laws, we need a stronger implementation of anti-corruption laws, because private sector backs this and makes this happen. On e-governance, which you were mentioning, I think the basic solution to avoid corruption or to reduce corruption is to remove the interface between private sector and between government. And the way to remove it is to go online. So that anything you wish to apply for, anything you wish to demand or license or whatever, you apply online. So you don't have to meet anybody face to face. You apply online and get your approvals on it. And I gave you the example recent of our e-auction on the coal mines. I gave you the example of the e-auction on the telecom sector. All of it has been just on a computer. You do not meet anybody, you do not give an application to anybody. And that's the way, that's really the way forward for solving this issue of remaining away from direct interface with bureaucracy.
China is currently mired at the crossroad of Lewis turning point, which is hallmark of the middle income trap. China is wrestling with the problem of whether we could upgrade our niche in the international industrial chain, high value added chain, so that we would not just be called a manufacturing center at the cost of the environment. Having said this, a lot of financial experts say that the online financing would be one of the viable options on the table, creating a lot of jobs for the hungry job seekers, millions of them, of university graduates, for example. Do you think you are facing much the same problem, or you are rather very proud of having a big young population, the labor force, that will help the manufacturing, and that's one of the road paths for enjoying quick development for most of the low-income economies?
For a lot of low-income economies and with India, the demographic dividend is an advantage, because your labor growth, your labor force, as well as your productivity grows when there is a
But don't you think the labor-intensive manufacturing in your country would follow the same tragic path of the environmental decline as we witnessed in China?
It could, but you have to be just more careful with it. So whether you're going into chemicals, whether you're going into power sector, whether you're going into textiles or whatever, you have to have more stringent green laws to ensure that the damage to the environment is limited, and we do have it. We have green tribunals.
Excuse me, if you have too stringent laws about the environmental protection, you're going to slow down the growth. That's the price you have to pay. Then in that case, you are not likely to overtake China.
I agree with you that it is a price to pay, but again, as I mentioned to you, I don't think the game here is to overtake China or not overtake China. China's economy is already 3 times the size of India, so it's not.
Then you will not be the media darling for the press because they boast of overtaking China one way or another. So they feel good.
What they talked about overtaking China was in GDP growth, not in per capita growth. Not in terms of the size of the economy. You are a bigger economy, there's no doubt about that. And I believe it's important that our GDP growth does grow high, and as I said, it doesn't matter to whom we compare as long as we go 8 to 10%, because the demographic dividend that we have will only get jobs if we grow at that level. So we must grow at that level to get those jobs. But coming back to environment, yes, you said that it can slow down growth, and in fact even today one of the biggest blame that comes from industry, and we make a lot of noise about it, is the delay that happens in getting environmental approvals for your projects. But our point has always been, don't delay it. Say no if you have to, don't delay it. And I think that comes us back to the corruption issue, that it should be open and transparent. If I want to say no, but limit it to 60 days or whatever you fit for yourself, so that then I can look at other options or other places to go to. But these are difficult questions you're correctly raising in terms of an economy, in terms of environment, in terms of green growth. But there is no doubt about the fact that in the 21st century, we have to be careful about the environment.
The last issue, I'm afraid, is about education. We used to say China enjoys better advantages in primary education than you for the tertiary education. Is that still the case, and will that help strengthen the competitive edge of the Indian economy? But at the same time, we see growing income gap between rich and poor in your country. Do you think the elites will become richer, whilst a majority of Indians will be left behind?
You know, you have raised a very basic point in terms of growth of any economy. And we did see in the last 20 years that when our growth became higher, our poverty levels reduced. We had poverty levels of over 40%, and they went down to near 20%. So growth does bring equality, does bring the sharing of the pie at the global.
Do you think education will help?
And education is the biggest help of all. Mm-hmm. The aspiration of every single person, whether he be rural or he be urban poor, his aspiration is to educate his child. And India introduced 4 years ago the right to education. That means every single child must be able to go to a primary school, the same way you did in China, and you had a tremendous success because of it. It is important that we must provide education for all the people. On the second point, on tertiary education being very good in India, this is again part of our English background. It's a colonial heritage that we picked up, and we have benefited from it, because you did have a lot of higher education institutes and English language and engineering and science and all the rest of that, and that has helped in making India emerge as an IT superpower as it did, and gave us tremendous branding. So I think both these two things have to come together.
Towards the end of this very nice conversation, which is also enlightening, what do you think of the future of G20? Is that going to totally replace G7 because of the expansion of the emerging markets like the BRICS? And do you think that we're going to take a second look at globalization, maybe the idea of a re-globalization on the terms of the emerging markets would be a most viable option for the developed countries?
Absolutely.
And AIIB may have set a very good example.
I totally agree with you. You cannot restrict world decision making just to a very limited number of people or limited number of countries. It's a large world. There are many emerging economies, developing economies with different aspirations, with different requirements. And if we have to have a global economy that supports all to develop together and supports inclusive growth, then this is one more format to ensure that inclusive growth happens, where you bring the voice of large countries like China and India on the table. So G20 is the way forward.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate your articulation and your time.
Thank you very much. What a pleasure, as always. Thank you.